Hey, everybody, welcome to the Bituation Room podcast, live stream thingy show situation. Oh my God. Thank you for not running away, first of all. I know we're going to be talking about, things happening in this country, and those things are immediately scary and terrifying and upsetting. And I know you'd rather just be binging White Lotus. I get it. Says the person stuck on season 2, because like, why am I late to it? I don't know. It's fine. It's a soap opera. Welcome. I am your host, Francesca Fiorentini. We have such a good show today. Sam Seder of the Majority Report is here. We're going to be talking about mass deportations. Yes, the American Gestapo is here. And you know, it is what it is. It's sloppy. It's a little sloppy. I'm just, a little loosey goosey here. And maybe that's a good thing. We're also going to be talking with Eric Blanc, who is an author, and he is also like a union organizer, and he wrote the book "We Are the Union: How Worker to Worker Organizing is Revitalizing Labor and Winning Big." I'm really curious to hear from him about what the hell is going on in terms of the mass layoffs of federal workers right now. What can non-federal workers do? How can people support them? And how can we learn from this revitalized labor energy that we've seen ever since 2022 and before that, to build for a mass worker movement that isn't just, as he will lay out, confined by the union structure. All right. So that's what we're going to dig into. No big deal. There's going to be some other good discussion. So if you're here, you know what to do. You click in the buttons. You just blindly palming the keys, all of them, 5 stars as a podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Like and share the stream if you're live here on YouTube. If you're over on Twitch, sup. I don't know why I still do that. But I hope you're subscribed. I hope you are a member over on Patreon, a patron, if you will. You guys know that this is only a third of the Bituation Room. We've got two other shows, Wednesdays and Fridays. Wednesdays are our bonus episode that you get when you become a patron. Patreon.com/Bituation Room. Last week, we talked about Gavin Newsom, who finally, by the way, decided to have a Democrat on his stupid ass podcast. We talked about his interview with Steve Bannon, which was as terrible as you could imagine. We talked about the father of the young girl, the 6-year-old who died of measles in West Texas. That was an interesting look into child abuse, if you will. So get at that by becoming a member or a patron, patreon.com/Bituation Room. In addition to so many other perks, 60% off the American Prospect magazine, which I write for every single edition. You get discounts on merch. I like to introduce a tier where you get discounts on live shows because, man, Sacramento was so fun. I am a little tired because we drove all day and then performed. 30 minutes into my set, I was like, I'm tired, but it was great. And thank you guys for coming out. Donald James, I see you there. And I will be doing another show at Cobb's Comedy in the Bay Area in San Francisco with Matt. So we're co-headlining Cobb's on Wednesday, May 7th. So get your tickets. Very, very excited to do that. And many, many more shows, including live Bituation Rooms, will be announced imminently. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, trying to think, okay, yes, I've said everything I need to say. Let's bring him in. He is the host, the co-host. He's a co-host. He's a co-host of the Majority Reports, which streams and you can listen to every single day, Monday through Friday. Please welcome Mr. Sam Seder. Hi, Sam.
It is a pleasure to be here. I was in Cobb's Comedy Club in November of 1992 when Clinton won.
When who? When Clinton won?
That night of the election.
Oh my God, tell me about this panel. Who else was on it? Were you doing stand-up?
It wasn't a panel. No, I was there. I don't know if I went on that night, but I was sort of doing an internship with Mark Maron where I would meet him every day in San Francisco at a coffee shop on Valencia and find out what
then?
I don't know. This
And
was
okay,
30.
why were you in San Francisco?
I was living in San Francisco for about 6 months, DJing, assistant DJing bar mitzvahs and doing comedy.
You
And
were a bar mitzvah DJ?
well, assistant bar
What
mitzvah.
does that mean? You, like, line up the next tracks, you hand over,
I
like,
just
the
listened.
records?
I just listened to whatever the head DJ said.
Okay,
Do
boss.
whatever. We're gonna do the. I can't remember what.
Sammy,
what
we need to get
kids
you.
would have
You
done
need to
at that
start the
time.
Macarena, okay? Because these
I think
kids,
that's what it was.
they can't do it on their own.
Set up the chairs, and I'm like, all right, I'll do it.
Okay, so you were there at Cobb's, and they were like, Clinton won. And what was that feeling? You were like, yes.
I remember looking around. I was not a huge fan of Clinton. I wasn't, I didn't do politics at that time in any way professionally, although I guess I was probably closer to politics at that age than I was probably 5 or 10 years later. I was not a huge fan of Clinton. I was excited that, we thought the Reagan era was over. But I do remember looking around going like, I can see relief, but why are people this excited by this guy?
I mean, that's like every feeling of every Democrat, right? I mean,
that's the problem that I think I learned that lesson there, and it was sort of, I saw it with Bush, and then you see it after Trump the first time. Like there's a relief and a flight to safety by the Democrats, and
I mean, I think Cuomo is going to be a fun little trial balloon if we're going to be like allowing, just sort of.
Well,
like
Andrew Cuomo is not going
misogynist POSs.
I don't think he's going anywhere outside of New York. He may win this mayorality. I can't speak.
Mayorality.
But I think there's I don't know. There's you got a primary in the middle of the summer in New York City, and I think
look, if the voting booth has air conditioning, there's no reason.
I think like the Hasidim, I don't think you're going to see like a lot of motivated voters for Cuomo, but that's my
I don't think so too. I think let's go Zoran. I want to ask you though, Sam, what are you bitching about today? March 18th. We're what, like 55 days, 56 days into Trump's presidency. We're going to talk a lot about that.
Yeah, I can barely hold it in. I've been bitching about it. I've been bitching about it for 72 hours.
Yeah.
Chuck F and Schumer.
Yeah.
See, I didn't swear. I didn't want to screw up things for you.
Yes. What about Mr.
Chuck
Schumer? It was more of a strategic choice.
No,
you can't let Elon shut down the government.
I don't believe him. I just don't. He has a reason. Maybe. I don't think he had a strategy at all, but he has a reason. But I don't think it's what he claims because it doesn't make any sense. His theory is that in September, Trump is going to be unpopular enough that they're going to be able to peel off some Republican senators, presumably, or House members. I think that's crazy thinking. I think that's insane thinking because, I mean, literally definitionally, right? Because 2012 or 2008, Obama said the fever's going to break. 2012, he said the fever's going to break. 2016, after Trump is the fever's going to break. Biden said the fever's going to break. They're wrong. And nobody thought the Republican budget resolution for next year was going to pass, and it did. Nobody thought the dirty continuing resolution was going to pass in the House, and it did. Fundamentally don't understand the dynamic that's going on there with Elon's money and with Trump's allure. But I don't believe that he even thinks that that's the strategy because on one hand, he says in September, the Republicans are going to pull away from Trump and they'll be able to pull off some senators. On the other hand, he says Trump and Musk will shut down all of these crucial parts of the government. Well, if Trump and Musk did that, beyond what Musk is doing now, Why wouldn't that dynamic just happen sooner and more dramatically where the Republicans are going to peel off? Like, you can't have it both ways. You can't think that time is just going to wear away and they're going to peel off, but he's going to do stuff that's so dramatic for 6 months. He's going to shut down the government and he's not going to suffer any political consequences. It doesn't make sense.
I mean, wouldn't that technically even slow some of these deportation flights we're going to be talking about a little bit later if the government did shut down?
No, there's no doubt. They would pick and choose and say, you can do the deportation, but you can't do this. But you can't do this. The Republican senators or congressmen that he thinks in September are going to peel off from Trump would peel off a lot quicker. Sure. And,
by the way, for context, this is all about obviously allowing for the budget bill to pass the Senate by voting for cloture and not using the filibuster in a way that would actually, benefit democracy. Chuck Schumer has faced massive backlash. And I think it's really interesting. I didn't expect this swift of backlash from his own party. So that's my question to you. Is the call now for resignation? And what about the other 9 senators that voted along with him?
Well, he's got to step down as leader. I mean, there's no strategy. There's no strategy. His job, I disagree with the votes that were taken by those other senators. And certainly, I would support a primary of Gillibrand because of not just that vote, but because of, frankly, the way that she's been championing crypto and the way that she's sort of like completely.
New York is really letting us down. I mean, our California 100%. Senators suck, but like, what is going on?
No, it's bad. But he is the leader. He is literally the most powerful Democrat in the country. He is the highest elected leader that we have. And he has no articulable strategy to deal with Trump other than wait. And that is insufficient. There could not be a more, a hotter, louder 5-alarm fire. If you do not deploy the filibuster in this instance, what is the purpose of the filibuster? Remember, this is a guy also who's protected the filibuster through his career. I mean, what is the point of this? There is
to
no
block any
strategy.
Real progress.
And look, and here's the thing. The idea that Hakeem Jeffries, when asked if there needs to be a change in leadership, he says, next question. The idea that Neera Tanden is like, what are you doing? Like, this is not ideological. This is simply a question of, do you have a plan or don't you? And he clearly does not have a plan. He completely misread this moment. He also, he misread his own party. Because had he been able to read his own party, he wouldn't have had to cancel his book tour 4 hours before it was supposed to start.
I was going to go all the way to Santa Monica to protest that bitch.
I was very looking forward to him and Richie Torres telling me about anti-Semitism.
Oh, God. I mean, he's not. I also think he thinks he's a New Yorker, that he could level with Trump, New Yorker to New Yorker, that somehow Trump respects him. I remember him saying something like that years ago. Similar, like he thinks
I'm a Brooklyn kid and he's a Queens kid and we can work this out. Well, how many times do you have to learn that that's not happening?
Yeah. No, it's a good thing to bitch about. I mean, I do think that, I think he should be primaried, but I also think he should step down, just leave. I mean, yes, obviously step down as leader.
I don't believe that he will be leader by 2028.
Fuck, I hope not.
Well, I mean, that's when he's up for re-election. No, he's up for re-election in,
I thought it was the next year.
Yeah, it's 2028. It's not 2026. It's 2028.
Yeah. No, hell no. There's no way. Go away. Bye-bye. You're the worst. And it's also the last thing we need to understand, because you've been talking about this on your show, is that there was poison pills in this budget bill about the future ability of Congress to legislate, to have a say
about
in the
tariffs.
budget.
About tariffs.
Explain that.
What the Republicans did is there is an ability for the Congress to get rid of tariffs. Mm-hmm. And they basically legislated their ability to do so out of their power through this legislation, so that if the tariffs are a problem, the Republicans have inoculated themselves because there's no way for them to overturn the tariffs.
Right.
And so, I mean, it's such political malpractice. I think they should have filibustered a clean CR, but this was not a clean CR. It increased defense spending. It cut discretionary spending. That means government programs. It continued to fund agencies that have been half shut down by Elon Musk. And so that money just becomes a slush fund for wherever the
Right.
Trump wants to deploy it. It also cut $1.5 billion out of Washington, D.C.'s budget. So this was worse than a continuing resolution. And just as a material matter, it's problematic. As a political matter, you've got Elon Musk running around shutting down the government in slow motion, or not so slow motion. And yet they claim he's not even an employee. It's like this is Trump doing this stuff and not sticking to Republicans and not sticking to Trump in the way that it should, because you've got some type of like, what do you call it? A poltergeist going around and doing the cutting, because this guy's not even, he doesn't even exist as far as the U.S. government is concerned.
Right. Except during his joint address, Trump was like, Elon's doing a great job.
Exactly.
The administration's like, no, well, Trump's the head of Doge, but Elon's doing a great job. They know what's up.
The head of Doge was that woman who was on vacation in Mexico when she heard that she was head of Doge.
Ooh, me. Yeah.
Honestly, she answered the phone and she's like, I didn't know this was public yet.
Yeah, it's giving very big, like Costanza has to like answering the phone as, what was it? What are Vandalay Industries type, All right.
Don't know.
Let's talk about what I'm bitching about now. You've had your say. I wanted to talk to you because I've been bitching about this report ever since it came out. Media Matters put out this study entitled "The Right Dominates Online Media, the Online Media Ecosystem Seeping into Sports, Comedy, and Other Supposedly Non-Political Spaces." Now, to make my bitching sort of expedient, I want to say that I like this study. I think it's good that it happened. It basically, they lump into, all right, Paige, I got you. They say like, okay, we're going to study online media, especially podcasts and YouTube, but specifically YouTube, Rumble, video platforms. And they are not going to look at major news outlets like The Daily, right? Or anything that has the backing of like actual facts or news and whatnot, but that's fine. And they came away with the fact that right-wing outlets are totally dominating. Right-wing perspectives are dominating the field here. And, there's Trevor Noah's pretty big in terms of the liberal left space. They have PodSave on here. There's a bitty dot. And I think the Majority Report. Never heard of that show, but a little bitty dot on the Majority Report. And then I don't think the Habituation Room made the cut, but that's okay. They looked at 320 online shows and came away with that there's 101 right-leaning and 129 left-leaning that were active. But the asymmetry on the amount of people tuning in is huge. So the right-leaning online shows had 480.6 million total followers, nearly 5 times as many as left-leaning shows. And so the one thing, my critiques of this are a couple, and then I want your thoughts. My critiques that I find this, overall, the whole thing is obnoxious to me because it basically reinforces the idea that the left is a nothing burger on the media level. And I don't think that's totally honest, because I do think there are a lot of shows and podcasts that are pop culture, fashion, celebrity, that are kind of lib coded but aren't actually political, right? So I don't think that this takes into that big totality, whatnot. And then I also don't love that they just immediately called the Breakfast Club like lib, whereas Theo Von is right leaning. You could argue Theo Von's right leaning. Let's look up the people he's had on. There's a lot of comedians, but then of course there's like Candace Owens,
Dave
but
Smith.
like Dave Smith, but there's a lot of, it's mostly comics, right? And then Hassan was on the other day.
Yeah.
Tom Green is back on. So there's another thing that happens when we start to like label certain shows as being necessarily right and necessarily left. That being said, Rogan became what people thought he was. When they labeled him as right, he kind of just leaned into it. And
well, I don't think I would not say that's a causal connection, to be honest with you, but.
Well, that's what I was curious about, because there's part of me that's like, oh, don't call Theo Von right wing, because maybe he'll just like become even more right wing. But I think that there is
that trajectory happens, and regardless. I think there was an inevitability for a lot of these people. I mean, first off, I will also say that we need to keep in mind, and Milo Yiannopoulos actually was very explicit about this on his last visit, I think, on Tim Pool's show.
Yeah,
he explicitly said that, and I can't remember who it was. He said it was a billionaire who pumped a bunch of money into Ben Shapiro's show.
Yeah,
and then he said, in general, he said, we on the right, we fake it till we make it. In other words, we're going to buy viewers. We're going to buy downloads. It's going to put us on the top of these charts. And then you can slowly stop buying them as people like, oh, wait, this is the most popular show. I start to watch it. Right. That's the way these things were built. And
it doesn't show you the backers, right? Yeah. The money behind it.
Well, it doesn't show you that, like, what basically happens. They're popped to the top by right-wing money. And then, there is a bias in this country that, if you're in the top 10 in, iTunes, or if you're a top 10 in YouTube, you get passed around. I mean, we both know the whims of the algorithm. And the fact of the matter is, if you get, it's much easier to get, 50,000 views. If there's 40,000 fake ones, you're going to attract more people. It just
isn't that the New York Times bestseller game too? Of like, yes. Turns out this one person just bought a bunch of copies of Matt Walsh's book.
100%. And Milo Yiannopoulos is basically has decided he's going to go rogue in certain these situations, and he gave away the game. And so that doesn't mean that these people don't have those audiences, but it means that their growth was inorganic. And so that's to be kept in mind. We can argue about the taxonomy, and we can argue. I don't know if Media Matters labeling Theo Von is going to push him to the right or to the left. I mean, who knows with these people? My sense is that, like, your politics come out over time, and but also a lot of these people want success.
Well,
and there's money in them, their hills.
100%. There's a few dynamics, and we got to move on. But I blame kind of a lot of sides on this, but I definitely blame the lack of funding. As someone who's worked in like alternative media for many, many years, funders don't fund media. It's very difficult to get funding for a podcast or a channel, or like some kind of, or in my world, magazines, right? Really, really difficult to get foundation money for that kind of stuff. In other words, the good billionaires or the good donors or any of the people like the Mercer family, bolstering, the far right, or other folks who are behind the scenes, or, your random Russian oligarch and such. But I also, it is important to understand, first of all this is very male coded. I just want to name that. And that, like, the female coded stuff is, again, much more pop culture, that, like, stuff that I don't really touch, but it is, again, kind of lib. It is more progressive leaning. And what annoys me is that when those pop culture shows, and sort of putting it on the libs, when they get really big, they become allergic to politics almost by necessity. They're like, well, we don't want to lose sponsors. We don't want to lose our money. We don't want to lose our bag. Like, we will not touch politics. We are a massive YouTube show, and we make shows about like cooking and being stupid, whatever, and we will not touch politics. And the right does not see that distinction. The right is like, no. Once you get big enough, you should be interviewing Donald Trump. You should be interviewing, whomever, right? You should be interviewing these right-wing folks. And I'm sure that all their managers and all their bookers are sort of the same little like incestuous little pool there. But like, it's very funny because it's annoying because if you're a Democrat or you're a liberal, you just by virtue of being that big, you think that you can't touch the political rail because it'll screw you over when actually it might be critical to do that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I just think there isn't, and I just don't think there's the same economic reward structure on the broadly left as the broadly right. I mean, when cancel culture came up, I was like, we always have had cancel culture. It's just that it's a different set of people now who are being held to account because things have been more democratized.
Right. No, but it's also like people are just not laughing at your shitty joke anymore, and they have every right to not do that.
But my point being that, like, the Smothers Brothers, they got canceled, and by Nixon, 60 years ago. There's a lot of people you've never heard of because they're not even going to get in the door because of their politics.
Yep.
And so, I think that dynamic exists. I mean, I think it's wrong, but there have been differences, like look at like, what's his face? Bulworth. I mean, this is an old example, but it's an absent. And I think like someone like Matt Damon, sometimes does some of that, at least, publicly he'll speak out, but, hasn't necessarily had projects that would go that way. So I don't know.
But it's also, look, a lot of these, I categorize this show as comedy. Do I tell jokes? Not enough. You know what I mean? But like, that's the other thing is like the right is like, no, I'm going to just categorize this as comedy. Yeah, we're fucking around. And I feel like oftentimes, leftist progressives, we also are like, we want to actually give out honest, real information. We want to be held accountable. We don't just want to be kind of like throwing random shit out there, but also like, maybe we should. Maybe there should be, like, I've always said, Huck to a girl, instead of getting into meme coins, should have just started interviewing like Bernie Sanders, like real, lowest of the, bottom of the lowest common denominators type stuff. But anyway, we'll
I think
move
that
on.
would be helpful.
Yeah. I mean, if you could just be more memeable, Sam, I think that would be.
I know. I honestly wish I could be funnier. You're not the first person to tell me.
You're very funny. No, all right. We got to get into this week. But first, we have a new segment on this show that just started after the election. It's where we put all of the worst things that our president is doing and has done so we can just, never think about it again except for the moments when we think about it all the time. It is called Orange Man Bad. And I have to do the ad read after this. Here we go. This week, Orange Man was given advance warning for a massive Israeli strike, in fact, multiple strikes that have killed over 400 Palestinians in Gaza, including babies. I have no jokes for any of these things, people. Orange Man is now openly bombing Yemen, including children. 53 civilians, including children, were killed in what the regime is claiming is an attempt to go after Houthi rebels linked to Iran. Orange Man spoke with Vladimir Putin today, and they agreed to a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine without Ukraine. Orange Man also let MMA fighter Conor McGregor roam around the Oval Office and do a press conference. And that's like not the worst thing that happened this week. Orange Man has declared fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction because we're really just reliving every bad Republican presidency, but like head wound style. This is like head wound Bush. Fentanyl is a weapon of mass destruction. And honestly, who knows what weapons of mass destruction are anyway, so it might as well have been fentanyl this whole fucking time. Doggy has broken into the U.S. Institute of Peace, a congressionally funded independent nonprofit that works to advance U.S. values in conflict resolution, and he's now taken it over. So that's fun. And Orange Man's Department of Education no longer exists. I mean, it's been gutted. Half of the staff have been fired in what Linda McMahon is calling the final mission. But other than all that, Orange Man is doing pretty well. And that has been Orange Man Bad. Do you feel better?
I was going to say, when that music came on, I'm like, oh, this is pleasant. And then everything else happened. I know what you're trying to do.
It's part of it.
You're trying to make it better by less painful with the music. And that...
I see what you're doing. And it almost works. It almost works. When I have enough time to write some jokes about, oh my God, Conor McGregor giving a press conference. But you know what does make things better, Sam? And I know you know this, but every night and some days when I need to be extra switched on, usually when I'm debating Piers Morgan, I turn to Sunset Lake CBD. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Sunset Lake CBD is a proud sponsor of this show. They have awesome gummies and tinctures and salves. Is it salves or salves? You say salves,
what?
Right?
I've had this problem for years, but I will say I love the salve or salve. I switch back and forth. It's really it's an off-label use because it's supposed to be salve. It's supposed to be for
Pain,
achy muscles.
Yeah.
I get summertime eczema, and that stuff. Eczema
Hot
suffers
eczema
will
summer.
know. Eczema sufferers know. Like when you get a bad case of eczema, you'll put anything on it. Like you'll try anything. You'll like anything that you could literally put on it. You will try to see if it works. And I did the salve one time and it worked. And so that's my go-to now.
Love it. Love it. Hot eczema summer for Sam. Sunset Lake CBD. Get 20% off your entire purchase with coupon code FRANTIFA, FRANTIFA at checkout. And yes, I've been loving the Focus Gummies with Lion's Mane. They're awesome. And
I'm big into the Goodnight Oil tincture, to be honest with you.
That's one that has melatonin?
No. There's one with Sebade and Seben.
I like the one that has a little bit of THC because they have a new concoction, a new gummy, and that one is perfect.
Yes, the vibe.
No, they have a good night one. Never mind. We'll compare notes. Go to sunsetlakecbd.com. We got to get into the rest of this week. I promise you, I'll get the bottle. A lot happened, but only two things we're going to dig into. This is the week where. Sam Seder, if you were to self-deport somewhere, where would you go?
Where would I go? Boy, I hadn't really thought about that. But probably Nova Scotia.
Self-deporting to Nova Scotia. Okay, Todd Roy will be happy. I believe Todd's from there.
I don't know
mod.
who that is.
He's a mod on this channel.
Oh, Todd the mod. Okay.
Todd the mod, dude. I was thinking of self-deporting to Costa Rica.
I've heard very good things.
Yeah, I'm excited to do that. No, in all seriousness, I feel like we've got a dirty war on our hands in the making. That is what it seems like as Trump's Gestapo is taking place and mass deportations are happening very indiscriminately and yet very specifically on certain people. And there's three basic buckets, right? Latino immigrants, Palestine protesters, and like just for DEI shits and gigs, white randos. That's sort of the buckets I've got. Trump on Friday, I believe, invoked the Alien Enemies Act, which is only invoked or has been invoked during wartime in this country, specifically to go after Venezuelan migrants. It deported over 200 of them to not Venezuela, to El Salvador, strangely enough, saying that they are part of Tren de Aragua gangs. I got to say it right. It's just funny to me, Sam, that like Tren de Aragua started in a prison. I feel like maybe you wouldn't want to if you think that these immigrants are all gang members, which they're not, like don't put them back into prison. You know, maybe try something else if you're trying to nip gangs in the bud, but doesn't matter. he basically as these flights were heading towards El Salvador, a federal judge ordered them to be returned in the United States. That was ignored. The judge has put a 14-day restraining order on this Wartime Enemies Act, Alien Enemies Act, but it still went forward. I think you've seen this video. This is like a promo video that Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador, put out of these Venezuelans being deported from the United States and then having their, like, being violently hauled off. I mean, they got like a drone camera for this.
Oh yeah, I mean, this was a complete propaganda. I mean, look at this.
Look at this shit.
Absurd.
So, and they're hauling people away. They're shaving their heads and their beards and everything. Got a little royalty-free music in the background, at least we hope. And these are people who, by the way, we're now learning just happen to have tattoos.
Yep.
Like a tattoo artist happen to have tattoos. He entered this country legally. He was seeking asylum. A teenager in Dallas who had a tattoo is also among the deported. A 26-year-old whose wife said he's not in a gang. Again, this is just blanket, pick them up. And then, Nayib Bukele, who's been a friend of this administration because, he runs a police state. In response to the federal judge ordering the flights to turn around, basically, he tweeted, "Oopsie, too late. Ha, laugh, cry face." So yeah, that is.
And then Marco Rubio retweeted that.
They're buddies. Marco Rubio was in El Salvador, was in San Salvador meeting with Nayib Bukele while Elon was hollowing out the State Department, like, or a USAID. And Marco was like, damn it. So that's what's happening. And like, this is horrifying, but it also speaks to the ways that the narratives about undocumented people in this country have fed into this very moment. And anyone who seriously thinks that Tren de Aragua is like a scourge upon our country and that we're taking over buildings in Aurora, Colorado without evidence, this shit is on them too.
I mean, it is clear from the reporting that there are at least some people where there's a lot of evidence that they're not part of that gang. There is zero evidence that any of them are part of that gang. If they were such a problem, the idea that ICE could either swoop in and get 200, arrest 200 like this, like what? Why weren't you? What were you waiting for? If they're committing crimes, what have you been waiting for? To swoop in? You've been waiting 2 months for doing this? Of course, it's absurd. But on top of which, this Alien Enemies Act, like you say, has been invoked only 3 times in the history of this country. The War of 1812, World War I, World War II. The pattern there is that I had to use the word war each time it was invoked. There is no way you can say that right now we are involved with a war or any type of enemy incursion. Remember, after 9/11, which was done by multiple sleeper cells in this country, this was not invoked. And so,
which is crazy and again, I'm never going to be that person that's like, I miss George W. Bush. Like, no. But the fact that, no, they created an entire other infrastructure and, the Patriot Act,
there's all lots of
and
problems,
everything else.
Also, remember, you did not have now 25 years behind you in 2001. You did not have 25 years of the Federalist Society judges, because that's what they're banking on. They're banking on a right-wing judiciary that is going to sign off on this, because there really isn't a lot of legal precedent as to whether the president can invoke this at any time. There's no way you can argue that immigration is a greater threat now than it was a year or two ago. I mean,
Yeah.
the number of border crossings, the number of whatever metric you use, it's literally like a 10th or a 20th of what it was, in the wake of COVID. And so there's just no way to argue that there is some type of like emergency in which this act needs to be invoked. The only question is whether a right-wing judiciary will say you can do it whenever you want, is essentially like it's president's prerogative. And that is something that would have been completely impossible for George W. Bush to have done in the wake of 9/11. But we're 25 years later, and there's a whole different judiciary.
Yeah, no, it's terrifying. And also, Justice Roberts today, because I believe Donald Trump wanted this judge who issued that, stay on the Alien Enemies Act to be impeached. And Justice Roberts like, well, now I'm your friend, but you can't just do that. We shouldn't.
I worry about that if that's not Robert's way of seeming like I'm impartial. Now come to me with a case that's going to be material and
absolutely
good. I'll do you another solid, like he thanked him for at the State of the Union.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This Supreme Court's basically like, we'll totally green light your dirty war, but like try. Like just like do a little once over, copy edit it, run it through a couple more lawyers, and then, we'll sign off. And speaking of the dirty war, there's more. And I think this is where it concerns like our people, as, students who have said anything about Palestine, people on student visas, H-1B visas. This is a week after Mahmoud Khalil was swept up from his apartment next to his 8-month pregnant wife. And so you've got Columbia student Ranjavi Srinivasan, who's a Fulbright recipient. She just fled to Canada, which makes sense given what they are facing. And that's pretty much what this administration wants people to do.
Yep.
There's Dr. Rasha Alawi, who was a kidney transplant specialist on an H-1B visa. I believe she was deported. Because she had photos on her phone of the funeral of Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah leader, which is like, if you're Lebanese, that's not that crazy. And then you've got random whites. You've got a German-born green card holder, 34-year-old electrical engineer who was tortured by Border Patrol, it looks like.
At Logan Airport.
He was stripped naked and showered by 2 officers with ice cold water. He hardly got anything to drink, and then he collapsed. And then just today we learned that this a woman named Jasmine Moody, an actor, was held for 12 days while she tried to do the right thing and come forward and be like, hey, I just want to renew my visa. I'm going to do that at this port of entry. And they held her for 12 days. And that's like the other thing. And I just have to like share these other stories. But in Baltimore, there was a new article from The Nation out explaining how where ICE detention facilities have been shut down, immigrants are being held in facilities that are not meant for long-term stays, that don't have proper showers, bathrooms, privacy, anything like that. So a grandmother from Central America who did not have a criminal record was not allowed to shower for the entirety of her detention. She was denied toothpaste, toothbrushes, hair ties. She had to use a public toilet cell in front of other detainees. Someone with HIV wasn't given their medication. A trans woman spent 8 days alone in a holding cell before being transferred to an all-male detention facility. A Belizean man in his 50s who suffers from diabetes was lived in the country since he was 6 years old. He was in removal proceedings while serving in a state prison sentence when Sergil took on the case last year. That's his lawyer. ICE transferred him to the Baltimore courthouse upon his release without notifying his lawyer. For 2 days there, her client, who's diabetic, required constant glucose monitoring treatment, was not given his insulin or other medication, and became delirious. Upon his transfer to a facility in Florida, he was placed under medical observation for 23 hours due to uncontrolled diabetes. ICE is saying their detentions and holding these folks in, random holding cells, which really should be like, they're like drunk tanks, right? They're like, halfway points, that those are not subject to national detention guidelines. A spokesperson wrote that the agency, quote, remains committed to enforcing immigration laws fairly, blah, 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 ensures that everything is in full compliance with federal laws, but also we're not subject to those. So it really is like dirty war tactics, and it's coming down on, innocent fucking people.
Yeah, I mean it's a real problem. I mean, I vacillate between wondering if this is, the beginning of a broader plan, or if it isn't a recognition that they don't have the ability to deliver what they had promised their followers, which was mass deportation. So
Right.
in lieu of that, they're going to try and pursue the most egregious of deportations, the most extreme and propagandistic, and the ones that seem most intimidating and cruel. I have a feeling it's somewhere in between. Like, I don't know, I don't know that they're, Stephen Miller is sitting saying like, get the kidney specialist, what the prize kidney specialist, so that we prove to everybody that anybody is in trouble. I have a feeling it's more like all they got to do, because, the fact is that a lot of ICE officers, if you will, were basically washouts from the police academy.
Right.
They're not, I mean, you don't want to paint anybody with like too broad a brush, but I don't think you need to, I think you can get a fairly wide brush and say, these people are sort of scummy. And so when you take off the handcuffs, essentially, or the shackles, and you just say, guys, go to town, nobody's getting in trouble. You have no accountability. Their natural instinct takes over, and they go for the easiest, safest targets for them, right? The ones that are going to cause them the least amount of danger, where they can get as much of their sort of like rocks off on intimidating people. And that's the type of people they go for.
Yeah. On the grandmothers, on the people who are literally working construction sites. A Venezuelan man picked up at a construction site. This is like the opposite of going after hardened criminals, because, that requires, I don't know, police work and shit.
Yep.
It might be kind of hard to go after them. You can't just sweep them up. And there aren't that many hardened criminals. Meanwhile, yes, our president is a convicted rapist. I mean, sexual abuser. Pick your poison. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's just whatever. It doesn't matter. It's indiscriminate. It can be anyone. However, that's not the case for someone like Mahmoud Khalil or students who are being targeted, right?
So they'll take solicitations. You got to, they have a request line, and
you
if it's
can
the right
tweet
person,
at Marco Rubio.
Yep.
So that's the question for me, is like, that's why I call it a dirty war, because it's like, this is like, people can rat out. It's indiscriminate for everyone, but then it's like, but Palestine protesters, really.
Yep. I think that's true. I mean, we know it's true.
We have one more story to get to before we say bye-bye. And I have to, there is a comment here. Sunflower Dragon says, I've learned and shared so much info on Social Security because of Sam.
Well, that's my thing. So
I was going to ask you, Sam, as we're going to talk about Social Security and what, peddling the lie that there are dead people who are receiving checks. I was going to open by asking, how do we make Social Security sexy again? Was it ever sexy?
People love Social Security. They love Social Security. And then really, I mean, if you think about what the whole argument is against Social Security, is that it's failing. And the trouble they've had in the past with that argument is that everybody can see that it's not failing in its present tense. And that to the extent that it's going to fail in the future, if Congress does nothing, it's going to be underfunded, just like every single other element of the government. In fact, if Congress does nothing in 6 months, Social Security will be the only thing that's funded, because that's self-funding. in 6 months, they've got to pass another budget. If they don't do that, there's no money there. The fix is easy, raise the cap. But the way that you make Social Security sexy again is just remind people that it's going to be there and it's an easy fix.
I mean, this is the sort of like I just feel like the meme of the guy with the knife, and there's a guy in the other corner just very far away from him going like, "No." And it's very clear this guy's about to stab him and you could just run away. Like, and you sort of like
I'm
you
not
got to
savvy when it comes to such
the
things, but
the
I get
point
the
is the
idea.
point is this, is that we've known they've been coming after the right has been coming after Social Security, and in fact, some of the very people who are now like, "Oh, Trump is terrible. What a fascist," were the same ones who for decades were like, "But these entitlement programs, am I right? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
you gotta take it from somewhere." Peddling these lies that you've done a great job of dispelling, the idea that it's going in, it's going bankrupt, and that it's adding to the debt, both of which are not true. And now, because of the lie that Trump is peddling, just like they're eating the cats or eating the dogs, 180-year-olds are getting Social Security is now the lie that's been put out there. And instead of walking away from such a clear, bald-faced lie based on a misinterpretation of how Social Security, the systems work, because Doggy doesn't understand them, they're doubling down on them. And that's leading to actual impacts. And so I want to tell you about Ned Johnson of Seattle. Here he is. He's with his wife. He's 82. And I don't know if you can tell from the picture, but he's alive. So that's important for the story.
He's sitting up, but he's not moving.
Yes, it is a still. It is. We don't know.
Okay.
But it
All right.
seems like he
You
is
have an answer
alive.
for everything, but all right.
Allegedly, I don't want to get in trouble. His wife got a letter from the bank earlier this year that said, "Oh, our condolences that your husband died." It was not true and did not happen. And so what followed is that in February, he realized he didn't get paid Social Security. And then he didn't get his March check. This is from the Seattle Times. His Medicare insurance had been canceled. He also learned that when you die, your credit score gets marked as deceased, do not issue, so he can't get a loan. The good news is, I don't think it can go any lower than that, he said cheerfully. He called the bank and said they have an electronic notification that had been triggered on February 18th that said he had died in November. But I'm on the phone with you right now, he told them. Also, what did I die of? Take it up with Social Security, they said. So what followed, they write, was a near 3-week battle to resurrect himself. He called Social Security 2 or 3 times a day for 2 weeks, with each call put on hold, and then eventually disconnected. Finally, someone answered, gave him an appointment for March 13th. Then he got a call delaying that to March 24th. He says he went to the Social Security office. It was like an empty, grown over, like there was nobody there. But finally, he cut the line and just begged to be seen. Once in front of a human, Johnson said he was quickly able to prove he was alive using his passport and his gift of gab. That's very cute.
Mm-hmm.
They pledged to fix his predicament. And on Thursday this past week, his bank called to say it had returned and deducted deposits to his account. As of Friday morning, he still, though, hadn't received February or March's payment benefits. So this is having a real world impact. These lies. And also, who the fuck is telling these folks' banks that they're dead? What's going on?
I mean, who knows how this thing gets triggered? I think, frankly, the bigger story is going to be is that there's been a memo that was uncovered by Judd Legum over, I think it's Popular Information, which shows that internally they're planning to stop the ability of people to sign up for or deal with any issues with their Social Security over the phone. They're only allowing it online. Now, here is one consistent element about the vast majority of people who are on Social Security. They're old. And as one of those people, soon I'm going to be on Social Security, within a decade. Your ability to do stuff online sometimes is hampered. The older you get, the harder it is to operate the computer. It's much easier to use a phone and to explain things rather than trying to upload documents and whatnot. And they are purposefully doing this. They're also simultaneously saying you have to come in. You're older, you're less mobile, right? Simultaneously, they're also cutting offices. So you're basically asking people in their 60s, 70s, really 80s, maybe older, to come into an office that may be tens of miles away, 100 miles away. Like I said, they can't argue that Social Security doesn't work. They can only pretend that it won't work in the future, or they can begin to attend of the Social Security Administration, and inhibit their ability to do their jobs.
Yeah, this war of attrition. I mean, that sort of seems like the entire point of this Trump 2.0, right? Is like, we're going to make government dysfunctional and then say, see, it's a good thing we killed it because it was dead. We killed it dead. Like that, and it's terrifying, the idea that like they're just simply not renewing leases on Social Security Administration offices. And that's how this happens. But I'm just like, I think there's more to dig here in terms of who the hell's telling someone's bank that they've died and that they should no longer be receiving checks. Is this the first like doggy to, pipeline when they are getting people's, IRS information and all that, Social Security numbers? It's really terrifying, but we have to leave it there. Sam Seder, thank you so much for being on. I'm going to see you in a few hours on my other show, America Unhinged. I didn't plan it this way.
We are both very busy.
And I am sorry that you get me, another hour.
It is going to make
another 15
my day.
minutes.
It is going to make my day.
That's right. You goddamn right it is. Thank you so much for being back on. It's been
Thanks
too
for having
long.
me. Always fun.
I hope you stay well. What? Bye. Later. I'm really excited though, because we got to shift. We got to talk about, look, I think as the government's been hollowed out and all of these workers have been laid off en masse, I think a lot of us are wondering, where the hell is the union? What the hell? What can we do about this? These are workers' rights. And there's no wonder that the largest federal union has gotten a massive boost in membership. And so I'm really excited that we have Professor of Labor Studies at Rutgers University and author of the Substack Labor Politics, as well as the new book, We Are the Union, How Worker-to-Worker Organizing is Revitalizing Labor and Winning Big, Mr. Eric Blanc. I was looking for your book because I put it down somewhere.
Hello. Hey, thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for being here. Can you hear me okay, Eric?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Let's awesome. Well, I think we need to understand how important this moment is for workers' rights as Trump and Doge are firing folks en masse. Like, what's the impact of this on all workers? It's not just confined to the federal workforce. Why?
Yeah, the biggest mistake people could make right now is to think this is just going to impact federal workers themselves. And you suggested that, and it's entirely correct. It's not just that they're going to come after all unions next, but it's that the federal services that right now are getting decimated impact all Americans. So do you want to retire? I heard you were just talking about Social Security. How will you get your Social Security if there are half the Social Security workers in the administration, which is what they're proposing at a minimum?
Yep.
Are you interested in having your kids go to school? Well, how are they going to have grants and how are they going to have scholarships if they decimate the Pell Grants Foundation and if they decimate the Department of Education? Do you eat food? Well, how are you going to have food that is not polluted by these mega corporations that are just looking to make a quick buck if there's no regulation on food? Do you breathe air? All of these things that are currently people take, you don't, yeah, well, you might be the exception, but most people do. And the reality is that so many things that we take for granted as like a baseline level of functioning society are going to get destroyed if Trump and Musk get away with what they're trying to do, which is essentially privatize everything.
And then on
And
that level,
yeah,
like in terms of the workforce, like what does it mean to have these researchers and scientists being laid off and then they're all going to seek work in the private sector? Like how does the private sector get impacted by this? Because I'm seeing there's a lot of, companies that rely on grants or rely on funding from the government in part, and they're firing folks as well.
I mean, it's a really big and open question. The reality is the federal government in this country and in so many other countries has had to put money towards the type of sort of social provision research that not all companies think is immediately going to be profitable, because there's a lot of research that benefits a lot of people, but that isn't necessarily going to make a quick buck. And it's precisely those types of initiatives that aren't immediately monetizable, but that help people, that frankly, it's not clear the private sector will take up the slack. And so, I don't think anybody has an answer. And I don't think the government really cares at this point, and they're not really trying to figure out, somebody else can do it. They just, it's collateral damage. What do they care?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the stories I've been wanting to cover is, we won't be able to get to it in full, but I believe a week ago, Trump unilaterally dismantled the TSA union, which is wild. I mean, Sarah Nelson of the Flight Attendants Union called it Patco on steroids, was her quote. And there was this idea, I don't know how you could have had this idea, but that Trump might have been somehow pro-worker. By the way, TSA union, they're suing the Trump administration for disbanding the union. Now you can't have your union. But the idea, okay, Lori Chavez DeRemer, who's the Secretary of Labor, she at one point, didn't believe in right to work, or she believed in the PRO Act. I forgot what it was. She then has walked away from all of those stances. What do you say to the people that thought that Trump would be minimally pro-worker?
Yeah, I mean, they were lied to. So, what I would say to them is you've been lied to. And the real question now is whether you're going to adjust now that the reality is crystal clear. There's no ambiguity now about what this administration represents as far as working people. Just to give you one anecdote, I'm not sure if you saw this, but it was just leaked the other day who Trump is going to appoint as the head of the National Labor Relations Board, the general counsel. It's a dude named Crystal Carey, who's virtually like this unknown lawyer who worked for Morgan Lewis. Morgan Lewis is one of the major union busting companies whose major client is Amazon. Right. So you're literally bringing this sort of hack from the union busting world to head the agency that's supposed to regulate labor rights. So this is the wet dream of Jeff Bezos and every union buster. Gross. And it poses a real, question, I think, to the Teamsters union in particular, which is trying to its credit, organize Amazon. Well, this administration is actively doing everything possible to make that impossible and to try to undermine that. And so you have a choice. You can choose to call a spade and say that this is an anti-worker administration, or you can continue to paint lipstick on the pig of a Trump administration that has been already shown to be brutally anti-worker, anti-union. And, it remains to be seen what choice these union leaders make.
I mean, it's like, everyone who's trying to soft pedal Trump will find some way to deliberately finger you and your industry or your line of work. You're just like, again, Sean O'Brien, his whole ass is hanging out right now. Like you're going to be the head of an Amazon union buster is going to be, or a lawyer. Was it a lawyer for them? Is going to be the head of the NLRB?
Yeah, just a lawyer. Yeah, a lawyer from, sort of just a lawyer hack essentially. And I think it's actually a woman, Crystal, not a man. I think I got that wrong, but we don't even know who this person is. They just got announced. It's literally just, and you look up, it's a person, a union busting lawyer from Morgan Lewis.
Yeah. But I want to, I do want to pivot to talk about your book. And, I think really discussing this moment in labor history and all these upsurges that we've seen in retail and service industries. And actually think about how it, maybe at the end we could think about, how it could apply to this very moment that we're living in, and even maybe building toward, what I think a lot of lefties sort of maybe who don't know how to build for a general strike, but say the words general strike, because it seems like the only thing that could possibly grind what is clearly an assault on all of us and all of our rights and all these federal agencies, grind that to a halt. But really, let's talk about unions as they are configured, because you kind of, you have this healthy critique of them. How are unions in their current iteration sort of clunky top down and like not necessarily able to adapt to like workshops that kind of like take off in terms of unionizing efforts?
Yeah, the basic problem, frankly, is that most unions aren't trying to grow. Your average union is just sort of servicing its own membership. And so in that context of crisis in we live, political, economic, ecological, it's just most unions are keeping their heads down, hoping that somehow they survive. And so just that as a basic starting point is deadly. It's not going to work. And maybe it sort of worked for the last few decades, but at this point, it's just totally out of step with the moment we're in. So the most important thing is that unions need to start getting ambitious about organizing, because at this point, the labor movement represents 6% of the private sector workforce, 10% of the total workforce. So the reality is just if you are representing a tiny minority of the workforce, you're not going to have the power necessary to push back against the government and to push back against the billionaire class. So most unions need to pivot towards growing, and they haven't been. And that is a misreading of the situation. It reflects an over-reliance on hoping the Democrats are going to come save us. And God knows that's not going to happen now. The Democrats aren't even pretending they're trying to save us at this point. So it is incumbent on the labor movement to sort of fulfill the role that it played in the 1930s, when, frankly, there was a similar moment in which we didn't know whether things were going to go in an authoritarian direction or in a New Deal direction. I think the labor movement can reassert itself as sort of the standard bearer of welfare and the public good and democracy. But for it to do that, it needs to rely much more on letting workers lead, giving resources to workers to fight back, and not just keeping its head down and not relying on small numbers of staff to kind of pick on small little battles. We need millions of workers organizing. And the only way to do that is you put workers in the driver's seat.
Yeah. And talk to me about that, because like you have, documented some of these successful, or on their way to be successful unionization efforts. Starbucks is obviously one of the ones that sticks out, but even is it the reporters, the journalist guild?
Yeah, the news guild.
News guild, which I think is, as someone in news or has been in and out of it, professionally, and especially with online news media being such an unorganized, group of workers, is fascinating to me. So like, how have workers themselves been showing the way on this?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a record-breaking number of, for at least for the current, modern history of workers joining unions over the last 3 years. We had over 100,000 last year, about the same the year before, just a little bit less. And a lot of these workers are getting first contracts, and so you mentioned the News Guild. The News Guild has gone up against these horrible, evil hedge fund companies that are buying up all of journalism, and they've won. And these have been really hard battles. We're talking about like strikes that have had to last over a year in some cases. These aren't easy fights, and nevertheless they've won. And I would say that that's a bit of a proof of concept. And frankly, Starbucks is also a proof of concept. They've gone up against the 6th largest private employer, these workers. They've organized over 550 stores. They faced the worst union busting offensive since the 1930s. And nevertheless, they forced the company to the bargaining table. At this moment, as we speak, the company wants to settle and the workers are holding out for a better contract. But it's not, it's not true that somehow all of these big corporations are just ignoring the workers. They've really succeeded in showing their power. So I do think that this shows the way forward, and there's enough victories to say, yeah, this is a totally viable model. And it's frankly sort of infuriating that the rest of the labor movement hasn't invested in this type of organizing yet.
Yeah. And I think to your point about Democrats, like not just the labor movement, but Democrats broadly, you have been talking and writing about labor I'm sure before this, but I mean, you also, I think do you have another book about the 2018 teacher strikes in a lot of red states, which were incredibly inspiring and not, top down driven, not, led by the unions necessarily. This has all happened without, Bernie Sanders can't even really be called kind of like a union leader, but this has all happened organically without like either the union funds coming down or a Democratic Party line coming down, or really, again, we've got the NLRB under Biden being a massive, a really important step, and you don't discount that in your book, but like, imagine what could be possible if resources were changed, or that we actually had leadership that really did take unionization and union power seriously. You know what I'm saying? And it didn't have to just be on these movements to kind of go it alone.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The labor movement is currently sitting on 38 billion in assets that it's not using that should be used for this type of ambitious organizing. And frankly, like, if the labor leadership was serious about defeating Trumpism, and frankly, if the Democratic Party was, they would understand that the single best way to do that would be to start massively increasing union density. If you had 1 million workers joining unions every year, you'd start to turn around the sort of percentage of workers that are in unions, and Trump would have lost. The margins are still such that unionized workers, because they have this sense of an experience of solidarity and basic level of political education and class consciousness, vote against the right much more than their equivalents. And so even if it's just on a purely pragmatic ground of like, how do you defend and defeat the far right?
Your boss. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, the far right, but then also just, so even if you think that the thing is just political, which I don't, but if that's your criteria, like you just want to defeat MAGA, well, then support unions, like this is how you would do it, let alone the question of how you would build democracy at work. Because the reality is, if you don't have a union, you're living in an authoritarian regime every single time you punch in, every single time you show up for work. And so the question of democracy is sort of inseparable, I think, from the political and the economic sphere.
I love that. I did want to ask you, because I love that you don't separate unionization and labor from mass movements that, catch on, whether it's Occupy Wall Street, which, was more squarely about the economy, but like even Black Lives Matter or the anti-genocide protesters, and Gaza, being these galvanizing sort of, lightning rods, linchpins of moments, especially for young radicals. So like, and you document how that can be funneled into unionization efforts and like labor movements. So like, talk about that.
Yeah. The part of what I did for the book is I did a large scale survey. I reached out to every single union drive that went public in 2022. So over 2,000 drives, and got a lot of data. And one of the things I asked every, worker leader that led a union drive was, well, what, if anything, led you to move in this direction? And one of the really astounding things that I thought maybe might be the case, but I was surprised by the findings, was the extent to which seeing or participating in prior social movements played a crucial role for so many of these leaders. And the number one factor was Black Lives Matter. So many of these workers had participated in Black Lives Matter protests. And then number two, very close after that, was Bernie Sanders. And then third was sort of LGBTQ queer issues. So the combination of these three movements really radicalized a lot of young people. So you're talking specifically about a Gen Z, a Zoomer radicalization in the context of these movements that introduce people, I think, to a radical critique of society. And then frankly, also the limitations maybe of these movements in their more mainstream varieties, or, seeing Bernie wasn't able to take over the Democrats, seeing Black Lives Matter not be able to sustain itself, led a lot of these workers to figure out, like, how do we fight for liberation? How do we fight for political power? And the conclusion they come to is you need the labor movement. You need a stronger labor movement to do that, because unions have leverage. Because if you shut down your work, the boss has to listen to you, whether it's the public sector or the private sector. That's just a huge amount of power. And then frankly, it's a question of also, how do you persuade people? The workplace is the one place in our society where you're obliged to talk with a lot of people who don't already agree with you. So there's something about the labor movement, both because of its disruptive power and because it forces a level of persuasion on the left. We're not just doing echo chamber. That has a huge amount of potential power. And a lot of people came to that conclusion. And that's essentially why we're seeing this labor upsurge that we're seeing in this moment.
I think that your book really cuts across that lie that it is either, organizing along, class and in shops and unions and or, mass movements around things like racial justice, because you kind of track how they can be this like symbiotic relationship. And I think that's really important as we move forward under this, again, dirty war fascism that we're living in right now. And so I love that you're like, actually, the Black Lives Matter movement contributed to people becoming more conscious about their, roles as worker and workplace democracy and all that. And I think that's really critical. I mean, I love also you talking about Starbucks and, yes, specifically LGBTQ issues. Explain how that, I mean, for lack of a better term, identity politics fed into that union drive, and then maybe also add the Gaza element to it.
Right. And there's a lot of different identity politics. Corporate leadership had their own identity politics that was, profit making and shallow. But from below, the identity politics of the workers at Starbucks was crucial. So Starbucks workers were primed for unionization, in part because so many of them were queer, and like Starbucks, frankly, particularly outside the big cities, is one of the few places that you can sort of be out at work. And so it had this attraction factor of a certain young queer worker, that meant that when those expectations that the company would be something more humane and better were breached, right? People actually really did believe that Starbucks was like a humane company. And when people saw the reality that it wasn't, it was a very explosive dynamic. So you have that, you have the queer sort of culture feeding into unionization, and you had strikes over, the ability to put up pride signals and, and paraphernalia at work in a way that the management started backtracking on, because all of a sudden this stuff is no longer as, a lot of these companies that were very, very pro equality a couple of years ago are starting to backtrack already, right? So there's a conflict there. But then on Gaza, we saw a similar thing where, it was a very unexpected turn of events, but the members of Starbucks Workers United felt so strongly after October 7th about standing in solidarity with, with Gaza and with Palestine, that they demanded that their union issue a statement, and that, in solidarity, and that set this long kind of convoluted chain of events that ended up leading to a fight of the company. The company responded by saying that the union was pro-Hamas and pro-terror, blah, 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 all this crazy stuff. And out of this conflict emerged a boycott of Starbucks nationally and internationally that cost him $13 billion. It went viral online. And that was actually one of the major factors we found out in the book, through interviews and then just, looking at, some of the backroom data from management that ended up leading them to start bargaining with the union. They lost so much money from this boycott over Gaza that they felt like, this was one of the contributing factors that meant that they had to sort of start settling with the union. So you can see how these issues that might not immediately seem directly workplace related can feed into a unionization effort when the union is being strategic.
Yes, I love that. And also the way that like boycotts can be pro-worker. Like you can be sort of, leveraging as a consumer on the outside, working, in support of the unionizing workers and their negotiation efforts. I mean, which I know are ongoing and myriad and all that. So like, I love that. I guess I'm curious because, my experience, I mean, it feels like your critique of, organized labor is a little bit like of my critiques around like the nonprofit industrial complex, right? It is, kind of professionalized revolution, except it doesn't do revolution. And the labor movement has never been a safe thing, especially not in this country where May Day was founded, right? What came out of like, this is a country with incredibly militant labor history and, and again, in all kinds of history, civil rights movements and all this. And so the idea that, of course, we need infrastructure. Of course, you need infrastructure. You need funding. I don't pretend, I'm not 18 anymore, but, the ways that nonprofits have often, and also because of their funding, how they have to play it safe, have, limited some of the more radical thinking or radical approaches to a campaign, right? Lest they risk their funding. It seems like you kind of are leveling that critique at unions and all that. I guess I'm wondering, like, do they need to be remade? Like, I'm thinking of, Nina Turner has a sort of a cross union effort that I think is We Are Somebody. I believe that's what it's called. But like basically funds that can be like pooled strike funds, things like this that are much less wedded to a particular industry or a particular union, or is it just like redistributing kind of the funds that already exist in the unions and having them available for like discretionary or to see upstart, union drives, or what's your solution?
I mean, I do think the ideal situation is that we're able to transform the existing unions to adopt the type of organizing we've seen at Starbucks and in the News Guild, where you're able to leverage the existing infrastructure and resources of the unions, but to put workers in the driver's seat. And so in the book, I talk in detail about what this looks like, where workers are able to set strategy and workers are able to initiate campaigns. And so I do think there's a best of both worlds scenario where you don't have to scrap the entirety of the existing infrastructure. And I think that would be a mistake, but in which you can leverage these resources in a way that really is facilitating genuinely democratic grassroots organizing. And that's going to require more risk. And as you mentioned, part of the problem when you're so professionally sort of staff driven is you don't take the risks that are necessary to win big. And it is risky. You know, there's no guarantee that when you go up against a Starbucks or an Amazon or any of these companies or a Trump administration right now, if you're a federal worker, that you're going to win. But it is guaranteed that if you don't fight and if you don't try to take those risks, you will continue to lose. And so the only sort of force that's capable of driving forward a risky, ambitious dynamic really are workers. And so you need to have union leaders and, you know, kick out the bad old union leaders. You need union leaders from below who will keep on fighting to move in that direction. So I think that Starbucks Workers United, News Guild, they show that there's some sort of synthesis possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I was curious about this. I think I listened to your interview on The Dig, and you talked about, I believe it's DSA that is starting to encourage members and others to go back to salting or do more salting. Can you explain what salting is and why it's coming back around as a tactic, and what folks are doing now?
Yeah, so salting is when you get a job at a workplace with the goal ahead of time of unionizing it. And so salting played a really important role in Starbucks and initiating the campaign at Amazon. And sort of historically, this has been a crucial tactic of the labor movement, particularly for young people, particularly for young lefties who are trying to change the world. You know, there's no better thing to do right now than to get a job to fight Bezos directly, to fight, you know, these evil billionaires directly. And at this point, the political fight is almost indistinguishable from the economic fight because all the billionaires are behind the Trump administration. So if you want to fight Trumpism, you know, the best place to do that is in these big union battles. So DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, has launched a new SALT program called Workers Organizing Workers. And anybody listening to this can sign up for that. You just go to bit.ly, so bit.ly/salt now, so bit.ly/salt now, and you can sign up. And I'll give one more plug as far as organizing, because I would say that in addition to salting, the one most urgent thing that everybody can do is to support the federal workers who are fighting back. So we haven't talked as much about it, but I just really want to iterate that at this point, like the urgency of having the federal workers defeat, and I think they can defeat Elon Musk, is so central that no matter whether you're SALT or not, or if you're just a community supporter, going out there to support the workers who are fighting to save these services is crucial over the coming weeks, not like in 6-7 months, but like over the next couple days.
No, I mean, this is these are the backbone workers of our very country, right? It's like if we can't defend them, I mean, and this is what was really upsetting. And I don't know, Eric, maybe you have more of insight, but when all of this started happening, it's not like we didn't know it was going to happen because of Project 2025. And Democrats messaged around this. They knew. And so my question is, like, were the unions prepped for it? Did they have a response? Because it seems like a lot of federal workers are like, I don't know what to do. Do I take the buyout? Do I leave? Do I, what side are the police going to be on? Like, I mean, and that's, again, Elon's taken over, the U.S. Peace Institute with cops at his back. I mean, there was no, like, I'm like, what about interfacing with the police unions, which I know we all hate, but like, it's just a question of, like, everyone's been very flat-footed, despite, again, the meme of guy with knife a million miles away. This shit is coming down the pike.
Yeah, the short version is unions were not prepared. And honestly, a lot of union leaders are still kind of taking their lead from the Schumers of the world, and that's terrifying. The good news is, though, that despite that, there's been a whole layer and a whole growth, frankly, of a federal workers movement in a way that was really unexpected. And, we've seen it somewhat like the 2018 teacher strikes, where, if the official leaders won't lead, the ranks will. And that is happening right now. So there's a new federal unionist network that had a big day of action just last week or the week before, and is scaling up actions all over the country. So people who are, out there want to support, you can just go to savepublicservices.com to find out where the local actions are nearby you. And I'm actually really encouraged by this. And I think that what we've seen is that when, even if the top leaderships of unions aren't immediately fighting, a lot of times they will, under pressure, end up following the lead of their ranks. And so you're seeing that, and it's really amazing. It's a really heroic struggle, because imagine if you're a federal worker right now and Elon Musk is looking for any excuse to fire you. It's not a minor risk that when you speak out publicly, go to a demonstration, speak to the media. These are really heroic actions being done. And I think it's sort of incumbent on the rest of progressives and the left to kind of step up in the same way these federal workers are, because all of the doom and gloom that is very pervasive is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like nothing can be done, everything sucks, Trump is just, everything's awful. Well, obviously things are awful, like today in Gaza, I'm heartbroken. But the reality is that these attacks are very unpopular. Musk is very unpopular. Backlash can take him down. And so now is the time for action. It's not the time just to wallow in pity and misery. It's the time to fight back. And I think if large numbers of people do that, Musk will be thrown overboard by Trump. Trump doesn't have, I think, enough of a commitment to Musk to keep him in there, even if it takes the whole administration. So it's a winnable struggle, but it's going to require millions of people on the streets, not just hundreds and thousands.
Yeah, 100%. And I love that. And I saveourservices.com.
Savepublicservices.com.
Savepublicservices.com. Sign up and for actions in your area. And I think that's a really great way to get involved. And I totally agree with you. I mean, my cynicism tells me is well, Elon's just like Trump and Trump. No. Elon needs to go. Elon's problem number one, and there's many others. But if we can get this little see you next Tuesday out of power, that would be massive. It's to say nothing of all of our private data. I mean, we just did a story that puts, it's who knows who he's giving people's information to, invading the Social Security Administration, stealing people's data and telling their banks that they've died. You know what I mean? Again, that's not proven, but it sure as shit looks like what happened. Eric Blanc, thank you so much for joining me. Again, the book is We Are the Union, How Worker-to-Worker Organizing is Revitalizing Labor and Winning Big. But also, you can subscribe to laborpolitics.com. And just everyone needs to get on Substack. I am not the person to say this because I was late as hell to this, but laborpolitics.com. And anything else you want to plug, Eric?
No, I think that's it. I just, get involved, support the federal workers. One more thing I will plug. Yes. If you are a worker in a non-union workplace and you have not yet started organizing your coworkers, now is the time. And there's a really good resource for you to start doing that. It's called the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, EWOC, which I'm involved with, and it's been really effective in fighting back. So what you can do is you just go to workerorganizing.org and fill out a form, and a very experienced volunteer will help coach you through the steps necessary to start organizing your coworkers. So no matter what your issue is, whether it's Gaza, climate, racial justice, economic, just whether you just need to just get by, pay rent, the best way to impact that is building a union network, and EWOC is a really good step for getting you involved. So that's workerorganizing.org.
I love that. And I also think that a lot of people are they are partially employed, and I think that that's another thing that prevents people from joining unions. But so I don't know, you have thoughts on that in terms of people who are well, I have 3 jobs,
Yeah, but that's the norm. Any job can be a union job. The reality is that a union is workers coming together to make demands on their boss and building solidarity with each other. And so there's no law that prevents you from doing that. There's no structure that prevents you. One of the interesting things I found in my book is all of these really types of workplaces that you wouldn't expect there to be a union. People are building unions, whether it's a remote work, a very sort of flexible, whatever, people have still found a way to build that power. So don't assume that unions are just for coal miners or just for teachers or whatever you might assume it is. A union can be essentially anywhere for any worker. It's just up to you to make it happen.
And also, I do feel like the movements you've tracked are changing the, image of who is a union worker and who's it unionized. Who's building the union and who labor is. It's let's stop buying into MAGA's definition of the working class and realize it is young radicals. It's people of color. It's women, it is queer folks who are leading these efforts. And again, to your coal miner point, we have to also stop buying into the myths that the right just hands us and lies to us about.
Right. I mean, and it benefits them. The right wing has a huge amount to benefit from pitting working people against each other, whether you went to college or not, whatever your identity is. And it's crazy to me that the left buys into this sometimes too. And there's a sort of fetishization of certain types of workers. The reality is the workers are the vast majority of this country. We have so much more in common with each other than with this tiny minority up top. And I think that spirit of unity and that spirit of solidarity is just so much more powerful than all of the sort of weird silos that we like to draw between who's a real worker or not. And I think that it's time to move beyond that. And frankly, it's just, we don't have the time. At this point, there's a authoritarian coup going on right now. It's all hands on deck. And it's everybody against the billionaires. And I think that's the spirit that can win.
Everybody Against the Billionaires. Eric Blanc, I wish I was a student so I could take your class again, or midnight again, but for the first time. You know what I'm saying. Make Eric Blanc great again. You're great. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you all for sticking around. What a show. God, I wanted to end on some Gavin Newsom stuff. In fact, I will, just because I want a little palate cleanse, guys. You know, I've been going off about how Gavin Newsom is absolutely the worst and, does not deserve your love or praise. And even Jane Fonda says so now. I've been obsessed with this, but I just have to play it because it's so good. Gavin's got a new podcast out, and he finally decided to have someone who makes any kind of sense on Governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, was on. And Gavin's basically like, but shouldn't we reach out to the right like I've been doing, giving Steve Bannon little handies and Charlie Kirk rolling over and telling him how much my son loves him? And Tim Walz is like, nah, they're just racist.
Have they figured it out that the identity piece of this is more important than the actual substance behind it?
Well, they've been doing it for decades. I mean, we've saw the welfare queens. They've seen the Southern strategy. We've seen it over and over. It's an old playbook, and we're as dumb as we want to be that we allow them to do this with CRT and ESG and DEI and every three-letter word.
And then they demonize people.
Yeah, demonize, and they weaponize grievance. They other people. They talk down to people, past people. They humiliate people. They weaponize difficult issues.
And then you give them a platform, weaponize difficult issues, and then you fall into their trap.
But the bottom line is, and I think it goes back to what we began with, is, and I applaud you for this, is we cannot continue to be on the defense reacting to this. We've got to go on the offense. We got to meet people where they are. But I also think this, and this is where, this is part of the conversation I'm trying to have, is you got to respect people you disagree with, even.
No, you don't. You literally don't have to respect people you disagree with. I'm sorry. I go on Piers Morgan every month. I don't fucking respect none of those motherfuckers. I don't respect them. I don't respect them, and I don't have to respect them. You can't make me respect grifters and racists.
And you can't just dismiss people. This
How do you fight it?
This notion
I think
of
I could kick most of their ass. I do think that if they want to do it. I know I can outrun them, but I don't know if we're going to fall into that place where we want to. Okay, we challenge you to a WWE fight here type of thing.
Counter but it's a natural reaction. I think it's one of the reasons we're losing so many men. And again, it's multi-ethnic. It's not just white men. We're losing them. We're losing them to these guys online. We're losing them people that I'm bringing on this podcast as well. That's why I brought.
These are bad guys, though. These are bad guys.
But they exist, and we could deny they exist. They exist. Not only they exist,
or we could join them like you're doing. And this is Tim Walz saying they're bad guys like Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon.
Persist, and they're actually influencing young kids every single day.
How do we push some of those guys back under a rock?
I think we have to first understand what their motivations are. I think we have to understand what they're actually doing. And
you don't
think
that's racism and misogyny?
I think there's a lot of that, but I don't think.
You don't think it's racism and misogyny? I'm sorry, guys. That was the part I wanted to get to. And therein lies a difference between a real one and a phony. Gavin Newsom is a phony. Tim Walz is a real one. There he is, openly saying, as a straight cis white guy, don't you think it's racism and misogyny? We got to push him back under a rock. And Gavin's like, no. You got to lift up the rock, take out the grub, put a little makeup on it, make it your own, make it a nice bed, let it live in your home, let it eat the walls and, shit on your furniture. That's what you got to do to the right. So I love Tim Walz, vamos Tim Walz, and forever hating Gavin Newsom. Let's read some comments and get out of here because, oh my God. Let's see. Thistles for Eyes says, thanks for visiting our town with your set. For your set, Francesca, super fun to meet you and also your husband in person. Great set. Also, if your rep won't meet with folks, hosts an empty chair town hall. I love that. Just a good Clint Eastwood. Noah Myers, hey, Sam and Francesca, love you guys. Left is best. Thank you, Noah, for that. Max Vera Frank says, the left gets its news differently from smaller content creators and through different formats. They're mostly spread out, less podcasts and more platforms like TikTok and IG. Totally. And Media Matters didn't really talk about TikTok too much. So it's like, yeah, there's like a whole smattering of TikTok creators where people are like getting their news and getting their even historical information from. Donald James reminding us, Bitchuation Room, community funded. That is right. Indeed. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Bay Photo says, I think Chuck Schumer saw the stock market having its worst week in years 2 years, I can read, and probably got some calls from Wall Street donors. Yeah, they were like, don't mess this up. Don't stop it. Pondering Politics says, let's try this again. Butterfingers on my part. Fran, do you and Sam think AOC should primary Chuck? My gut says yes, but some say her popularity isn't statewide. Oh, I think the fact that there are already Democrats in the party talking about a primary says yes. The call is not coming from outside. It's coming from inside the Democratic Party. They want AOC to primary Chuck Schumer. And so thank you for the super chat, but yeah, absolutely. And I'm pretty sure Sam agrees with that. Barb LC says Schumer doesn't want to be one of Trump's enemies that's arrested and deported. Yeah, exactly. I like my life. Robert says bad Democrats need awful Republicans. Republican spiral suits Dem politics. Look at Gavin Newsom. Thank you for bolstering the point I also just made. I agree with you. Dems don't actually really want to do that much. They don't want to use the filibuster to raise the minimum wage. They don't want to, use they don't want to use any kind of parliamentarian rules, any kind of, shenanigans to do anything good for the people. They don't want to stick their neck out and then, risk a judge like rescinding it the way that Donald Trump is doing right now. They don't want to do executive orders because they're like, how would it look? It would look terrible. Yeah, but if it were a fucking cool EO, people would go to bat for it. And Albert who says, oh no, Sam Seder, what a fucking nightmare. Indeed. I'm going to be demonetized, guys. Send some more super chats my way because I swore a lot. Sam refrained and I did not. Ariane Mitchell or Marshall, thanks for coming to SAC. Y'all are so hilarious. Thank you, Ariane, for coming through. I think we met after the show. And Benjamin Morrill, thanks for gifting a sub. And with that, let's thank everybody who's been a patron at $10 or more and who is on Substack. I don't know if we have any new Substack folks. frannyfio.substack.com. This is the fart song. Oh, yeah. Thank you to Gus for giving out 5 subs, to Rochelle for giving out 5 subs. Oh my goodness. Thank you, DJ. Your empathic intellectual approach works, Franny. I try. Over on Twitch, thank you to Mike Boy for mayor. Resubscribe 19 months strong. Thank you Tim May KC. But let's go over to where my patrons are. Thank you so much, Aliera81, Lil Yumper, James Silva, Matt Holt. I love you. I love. Thank you to Sassy as Dragon as well for upgrading your membership. Thank you to new Substack subscribers, Nick Balderson, Isaac Klipnick, and Step17. You guys are wonderful. Thanks so much for supporting this little labor of love. You can catch me later today on America Unhinged, 8 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. That's every Tuesday and Thursday. Also follow the show on all the things on Twitter, on Blue Sky, Bituation Room, on TikTok and Instagram, Bituation Pod. Thank you to Paige Omek, our producer, to Brent Godin, who is crushing it into his second month over on the YouTubes and the Facebooks. Thank you to Andy Vasoyan, who was on our show on Friday. If you guys didn't catch our discussion about Praxis and the privatized cities that are soon to be here, make sure you go back and listen to that. I will see y'all tomorrow for the bonus episode. And remember, until then, fight the power, fuck the patriarchy, free Palestine, and don't just bitch about it, be about it.